Good evening. Welcome to Earth to the Other Side. My name is John. I'm your host. Today, my guest is Mr. David Suich, who is an NDE researcher with over 15 years' experience researching near-death experiences and speaking to over 700 people. Welcome back, David. It's great to have you on again. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, John. It's good to be back.
Came across some questions that we didn't get to in the last two.
All right, sounds great. Let's go.
So the first one I got here, this is from Mortal Clown. And please ask him to comment on the soul trap theory and entities that take the form of relatives, Jesus, angels, etc.
Okay, I've heard about that. And there's people who kind of are apprehensive about all this stuff that happens in near-death experiences. You're told you have to go back to Earth. Some are given a choice, some are told. They make you go through this life review, and you find out there really is no privacy. I mean, everything you ever thought, said, done, and felt has been recorded. And you go through it all in your life review with angelic beings watching, and you get tricked, and you're forced to come down here to Earth and suffer. And that's just not the case. That is probably because in this world, there's a great deal of manipulation and control and abuse and all sorts of things like that. And so people have to put their defenses up. I mean, it's a survival mechanism that we have to do sometimes. And what we do as human beings is we tend to take human attributes and project them onto God. And nothing could be more different than the truth. The truth is that we apply it to come down here. We work hard. And Earth is the most difficult planet in this galaxy to incarnate into, and it's the third most difficult in the entire universe. So this is like, you're in a top level class here, and out of every 100 souls that wants to come here, there's only space for one. There's only a body for one. And so part of coming down here is agreeing to all this stuff, agreeing to the life review. Everything you do is going to be recorded so that you can see it afterwards. It's part of the learning experience. And is there entities that might appear as a relative or something like that to try and trick you or appear as? Sure. It's not very common. I haven't heard of that much. And if you are living a life of joy, you kind of tend to repel negative entities. It's like a foul smell is to you or me. They don't like people living in light, living in joy, living in love. Any negative entity is going to be pushed away from that kind of energy. So the best thing you can do to protect yourself against negative energies is just to live a life of joy and compassion. Because we're the daredevil souls. In terms of souls, in terms of people, there's people who like to sit at home on their lazy boy, and then there's people who like to go out and have crazy adventures. And then there's the nutcases that put the flying suits on, and they fly through, or they jump off out of an airplane, or they're doing all sorts of crazy stuff. That's how we are as souls. So we're probably going to want the next adventure, even though this is tough, we're probably going to want the next adventure. So,
Yeah. Okay, let's go on to the next question. Thank you very much,
sure.
by the way. So, if there are life contracts, where is the evidence that we agreed? That's a nice one. I mean, that's a good one. What do you
Where's
think of
the
that?
evidence that we agree? Well, where's the
Yeah.
evidence that you have a dream? I mean, if you were the only person in the world that dreamed, you wouldn't be able to prove it to anybody. So there's lots of things that happen that we can't prove. We made these contracts before we came here. We sit down with guides. Some people call them a council of elders. So we sit down with our, in the afterlife, or our true home, I should say. We sit down with our soul group because we incarnate the different roles. Okay, this time we're going to be brothers, you and me, and these two souls are going to be our parents, and these over here are going to be our enemies, and that kind of thing. And so we plan it all out. And then you have some elders that kind of make sure you don't take on any challenges that are too big or going to cause problems. And so we plan it all out, just like a vacation itinerary. And then part of the game is amnesia, because it makes it a better experience. If we knew this was just kind of a dream or a simulation, and I have free will, I can do anything I want, we might not take it seriously. So amnesia is part of it. So we agree to all this. This is something we agree to. And even people who have very difficult lives, a person who's been victimized in some way, abused, or been, beaten, or has had an extremely difficult life, they know the potentials and some of the large events. They choose to go through those experiences to learn from them. And that's a hard one for me. I mean, did I choose 20 years of chronic pain before I finally started to heal? I probably did, because it is our toughest challenges that make us who we are, right? So Mary Kay Cosmetics, you know who she is, right?
Yeah.
She's a billionaire. I think she's still alive. Well, how did she get started? She was in the cosmetics industry and she was top salesperson. And, back then, and I think it was the 50s or 60s, it was the good old boy system. So the men got promoted. So one of her trainees, who wasn't nearly as good as her, got promoted to be her boss. And she got angry, started her own cosmetics business. So out of being looked over, she turned it around. Oprah Winfrey, pregnant at 14, wanted to commit, all sorts of abuse. And she became a spokesperson for kindness and helping others. And she even has a program where they help young African-American girls in Africa get their college degrees. So it is our greatest challenges and sufferings that make us who we are. And we agree to all that.
I don't know if we talked about this last time, but this example seems to come up a lot in my head. And it's just one day, this poor little, this family experienced such tragedy. I think that it was a 5-year-old. He was just playing out on the lawn, and right around Halloween, and these two teens were basically drag racing down the street in a very suburban area, and whatever happened, one of them ended up hitting this kid on the lawn, and that was the end of that. So I used to think, months later, after the devastation, I was thinking to myself, like, could this really be some part of somebody's plan? And
something that big? Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So, and then you ask yourself, oh, well, who's the plan for? Well, it was for everybody, I guess. It was for the kid, but it was probably even more for the family to learn from and to experience that type of tragedy, that type of loss, right?
Yes, it's planned so that all involved learn. And a big event like that, we normally plan where we're going to be born, who our parents are, how we're going to die, how long we're going to live. And again, just like a vacation itinerary, you're not being controlled by your vacation itinerary. You wrote it, and you can always deviate from the itinerary if you want. And I have heard about souls who planned, I'm going to die at this specific time, and then they decided not to because they had more work to do or whatever. But if I have 5 or 6 very long vacations in a row, and I haven't had much rest, and those vacations were kind of tough, 3-4 week vacations, and now I just want to take a little mini vacation, 2-3 days. I can do that. I'm not ready for a long vacation. Some souls are like that. They've chosen a couple, 4 or 5 really hard lifetimes in a row. And they're like, yeah, I want to have a lifetime, but I don't want to do 80 years. I'm just going to do 5 or 10 or 20. And that's decided by the soul. And, it seems tragic to us because from our perspective, a life has been extinguished and nothing's further from the truth. They went home before we did. We're on a long vacation together. You go home after 2 days. I'm going to be out for 2 months. Well, yeah, I'm going to miss you, but I'm going to see you again when I go home. And it's not the end of the world. So it's not the tragedy that we see it as. We see it as a tragedy, and it's not.
Yeah, I really love how you phrase that, and yeah, very eloquent. That works for me. Let's go on to the next question. So, this, I don't know if maybe we covered this already. It says, how come we aren't allowed to lead our life and death according to our plan and are told what to do in NDEs by them?
Well, we're given guidance, but we're never controlled. So in heaven, you have freedom, but that's not quite the same as free will. So in heaven, you are, in our true home, you are connected to divine consciousness, to all that is, to the mind of God, for lack of a better word. And when you're connected at the divine plan, you see it. And so you go along with it because it is what I've heard many times from many near-death experiencers. They'll say things like, it's a perfect plan and it's working itself out in its perfection. Well, it doesn't seem that way from down here. And so down here we have free will, which is different. We can deviate from the divine plan. And we're not being forced to do anything. And if a near-death experiencer does get to heaven and says, they tell them it's not your time, you got to go back, they're not forced. That was the soul saying, hey, if I die and I get here, send me back. I need to finish the work. My little human brain doesn't know what's going on, but up here's a soul. I do. Don't let me go home early. I'm almost like a drug addict that says, well, I gotta get over my addiction. And so, handcuff me to the bed and don't let me out for 3 days till I'm past the withdrawals. Well, when you're going through the withdrawals, you're going to be screaming and crying. It's difficult down here. When you're going through it, it's like, I'm being forced to do this. We're not being forced to do anything. We have absolute free will down here. We can deviate from the divine plan, which ironically is part of the divine plan. So when you deviate from the divine plan and experience what happens because of that, it makes you love and work on the divine plan even more. So it strengthens. It's part of the engine of growth of creation, what we do down here. So by incarnating in physical lives and doing this stuff, some of it seems like in the moment we don't want to do it, but that's
the engine through a test.
Yeah.
the oil of life. So what about the concept of, because I've heard from various people that we have 8 outs. So 8, strategize out points that we can leave this incarnation. Have you ever heard of such a thing?
I've heard that people plan basically how long of a life they want to have, how they're going to die, and that kind of thing. I haven't heard of the 8 points.
Okay. I was just curious if you'd heard about that. All right. So let's see. I understand that there are relatively few negative near-death experiences compared to the ones that are life-affirming, etc. In your studies, do any of the people who have less of a fuzzy NDE eventually find that their experience contained positive after effects? Good question.
Oh, absolutely. One of my relatives, whose name I'm not going to mention, he died of a heart attack, and he found himself in a negative NDE, and he screamed out to Jesus for help, and Jesus came and got him. And when he came back, he says, "Oh, I don't dabble in any of the negative stuff. I quit smoking, I quit drinking, I quit gambling, and I'm good to people, and I try not to get angry and avoid revenge and all." Oh yeah, he was scared straight. So every soul at some point, I haven't heard this directly from near-death experiencers, but I've kind of heard indirect evidence. Every soul at some point in their development chooses to experience complete disconnection from the divine source. And when you do that, when you choose a partial or complete disconnection, we're kind of in a partial disconnection right now. But when you choose a more severe disconnection or complete disconnection, there's nothing left but fear. And it's an experience we decide to go through. We're not put through it. It's an experience we decide to have to kind of show us the importance of that connection. And when you disconnect and then reconnect, you appreciate that connection even more. It's stronger. Just like what happens when somebody you love dearly, that you just adore, this is your best friend in the whole world, maybe it's a spouse, a friend or something like that. They go away for 3 months on a long vacation and they come back. Oh my God, it's so happy to see you. And you're throwing your arms around. The connection's stronger. And so the same thing happens with us when we do that. So every soul decides to do it as part of their development. And it's not a punishment. It's not a permanent sentence. It's a learning experience in the most difficult way possible. So again, the more we suffer, the faster we learn. So it's just part of learning fast. Just like if I want to get from where I am on foot to a mile away, I can take a leisurely walk, 25 minutes, or I can run and get there in 10, but I'm going to sweat and be out of breath and my legs are going to hurt and I'm going to suffer. And there's no right or wrong to that. You can take things slow and easy, or you can take some fast lessons. Most of the souls on this planet like the fast lessons because this is the fast learning course, but there's no right and wrong to that. And there's no hurry. Every person literally has all of eternity to grow and develop. And we'll all get to our goals and we'll all continue to grow for eternity. It never stops. That I got from the other side of the veil. Our growth and learning and experiencing new things never ends.
Do you think there's a correlation between how much we suffer here in our lifetime and the ascension of or development of our soul?
Yeah, so we kind of talked about that a little bit. So when you decide to do something, so today, for instance, before this podcast, I went out in the garden and I worked and I decided I'm just going to go 2 hours and I'm going to do this amount of work. So we decide to do that. And souls are the same way, oh, I'm tired. I'm not going to do too much work today, or I feel great. I've had a long rest. I'm energized. So a soul may choose 3 or 4 very difficult lives in a row and need to take a long break. And, you'll see people on earth that seem to have charmed lives. They're good looking, they're successful financially, they don't really have any emotional problems, they're happy, joyful people. They don't really struggle much in life. They have great relationships. They come from a good, healthy, balanced family. And I'm not saying they don't have any problems, but they're pretty minor. And they have this great life, and they die at a ripe old age. And we think, wow, that person really had it made. No,
Hmm.
they were taking a break. They're like, yeah, I want that fast learning experience of Earth, but I'm not going to do a tough life this time. I'm going to take it easy. They're taking a break, and they're going to learn less. Or maybe, part of that is they're going to be a guide to others who are struggling.
What about the concept of hell? Because, this is a question that comes up a lot. And, there are obviously many that have had these hellish experiences. Now, in discussions I've had with others, and you as well, I know we've talked about this. We sort of come down to, well, it's the frame of mind that individual was in and what they were going through at the time. It's not an actual place; it's a state of consciousness.
Well, the term place is a human term describing a physical place, and there's similar things like that in the afterlife. But, to quote the movie Defending Your Life, he says, actually, there is no hell, although I hear downtown Los Angeles is getting pretty close. there really is no heaven or hell. There are simply countless realms where the collective group of souls in those realms, souls of like mind, of like consciousness, of like vibration, get together and they create those realms with their consciousness. So in the afterlife, they set up something that we would call quantum fields. And it's sort of like a blank construct where anything you can think or imagine gets created, gets manifested. And so like souls attract each other. So if a person dies in an extremely negative state, so not all suicides, but a lot of suicides have negative near-death experiences. And I believe the reason is they're in this very negative emotional state, hopelessness, shame, which is one of the most lowest vibrational states you can have, shame. And so when they die, they get attracted to these environments created by the collective group of souls that are there. And if they're very low or very dense, low vibration souls, it's going to be a hellish environment. And I've even heard of cases where somebody's in the black void where you can kind of create with your consciousness, and they're freaking out because they realize they're dead and they're going into fear, and it becomes very hellish. And then at some point they say, well, I'm dead. There's nothing I can do about it. And as soon as they relax, the experience becomes positive. It changes to positive. So yeah, there's a certain amount that we're creating, or we're attracting ourselves to a certain realm based on our emotional state. And of course, every person that I've ever heard in a negative or hellish NDE, it's about 5% of the 1,000+ testimonies I've heard over the years. Every single one of them who did call out to heaven for help, they all got rescued 100% of the time. I never heard a hellish NDE where they said, well, I called out to God and nothing happened, or I called out to Jesus, or I called out for help and nothing happened. You always get help.
Yeah,
So
I
if you
haven't heard of
find
that
yourself
either.
in that situation, you can't calm down, call out for help. That'd be my advice.
Because I know that some have drawn comparisons to their experiences in hell and their hellish experiences where they've like brought in some pretty uh, specific details that matched, between experiencers.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things a lot of people mention is the smell, foul smell in the negative astral realms, or the hellish astral realms, really foul smell. And you never hear about that. I've heard about lakes of fire and torture and things like that. But yeah, smell is pretty bad, apparently.
Mm, yeah. Okay, next question. On the topic of STEs, so spiritually transformative experiences, do you think someone having a breakthrough in a spiritual awakening related meditation could have a spiritual transformative experience comparable or even more profound to a near-death experience?
I think it's possible, but if it happens, it's really rare. That'd be my opinion. Definitely an opinion, not something I've heard from NDEs. And the reason is this: when I hear about these guys talk about being in the light, in the presence of the divine creator, they talk about it like it's the best thing that ever happened to them in their life. It's the everything of life is to experience that love. And it's so strong that even the word love is completely inadequate to describe it. You can't describe it in human words. You have to experience it. And the way they talk about it is, they say there's no words for that white light and that love. And when you experience it, it changes you forever. It changes your perspectives. And so, yeah, I think it's possible, and probably it's happened, but it's probably pretty rare. I think what we get is hints of it, but definitely there are many people who I've seen, some who I know personally, who I've watched go through a tremendous transformation from being, people who worry a lot and have anxiety and get frustrated and angry to these calm, beautiful, loving. So they're not perfect. Everybody has their bad days and bad moments, but transformation to a much more peaceful, enjoyable life. And even people who study near-death experiencers go through many of the same transformations that those who have the actual experience go through.
In your research, have you ever come across anyone who'd experienced a multiverse vision? So, for example, they say they may have seen themselves and their partner living in the same time, different universe, experiencing similar but different lives.
Out of the 1,000+ testimonies I've heard, I have never heard of a single person visiting an alternate reality where they met themselves or somebody they know. But I have heard 3, and only 3, where people were shown alternate versions of Earth. One guy saw an alternate version of Earth where Muhammad died as a child from an illness at 11 years old. And so the Middle East was mostly Christian and Jewish. And the Twin Towers were still up, even though it was present day. This was a couple of years ago. There was another one where a guy saw an alternate version of Earth that the Nazis had won World War II. Now, this was kind of a freaky thing for me because I mentioned this on a podcast. And, we even mentioned on this podcast that, they made a TV series, about that very same thing, right? The Man from High Castle, I think it was called. And in the comments, one of the guys says, "Oh, I know the guy, I'm friends with the guy who wrote the book that TV series was based on. And he told me in confidence that he had visions of an alternate version of Earth and that it wasn't a made up story." I almost fell off my chair. I mean, that seems crazy to me, but I've heard about the alternate timelines, and they can split and merge. And that's where you get things called like the Mandela effect, where this group of people remembers one thing and this other group remembers another thing, and only one is true. Well, that's because when a timeline merges, when there's a split and a merge, it's just like when you are copying files or computer from one location to another, and it says, "Oh, these 3 files are already there. Which one do you want to keep?" So some people keep this memory and some people keep that memory. And so, yeah, the multiverse theory that the scientists have, that there's many other dimensions, parallel realities, that seems to be correct. Although 3, when I hear it from 3 NDEs, I'm a little skeptical. When I hear it, from several hundred, like the importance of love, well, that I believe without a doubt. Multiverse theory, I still am not sure about that one, but I tend to believe it's true. I think the way it works, if I had to guess, and again, a little disclaimer, not heard this from NDEs, but, I used to play this video game called Civilization 2. And you start off with a little settler and you got to build cities and eventually conquer the world or send a spaceship to another planet to win. And, you'd save the game at some point. Things are going well. So you save the game and then you go in this direction and, I got destroyed. So you go back to the save game and you go, I'm going to try this. So I think the universe does that. It creates lots of different realities, parallel realities, where different things are tried. And it says, well, what worked out best? And that's the one that gets saved. That's the one we continue on. So I think that happens. And there are trance channelers like Bashar, channeled by Daryl Anka. And I've seen Bashar live a couple times. He's what I would call a trusted channeler. Cryon is another one of my favorites. And he talks about it. Somebody asked him, well, who are you? And he says, well, I'm from an alternate reality where human beings started propagating through cloning. And when you make a copy of a copy, it degrades. And so we're coming back to Earth and taking genetic samples from you guys. They can travel in time. And we're using that to fix our DNA problems. And I think in the TV series Stargate, the Asgard, they do a pretty good depiction of that. I think there's sometimes in these science fiction shows, there's people who are subconsciously aware of reality, because that's exactly what they said in the TV series with the Asgard. And of course, I heard from one near-death experiencer think it was a near-death experiencer. They said, well, I was abducted. How was this allowed to happen? And they said, oh, you agreed to that in your soul plan. You agreed to be abducted so that they could get these genetic samples to help fix their biology. So that was something you were helping out with. So, we think we're a victim, and it was just the opposite. She was helping out this other race to save themselves.
A lot of people have asked me this, and I want to get your take on it. So, when talking about reincarnation, for example, so let's say, so and so dies, they go to heaven, and you're fully expecting to meet them there when it's your time. But if they've reincarnated, will they just not be there? My personal belief is that our consciousness is massive, and that a big chunk of it just stays at home, and little pieces of it may incarnate here and there. So if ever, you're always there no matter what. But I wanted to know, is that far-fetched? Is that out there? Or do you think has some truth to it?
John, you hit the nail on the head. So what I've heard in NDEs is that we're not all here. You have somebody say, you say something kind of crazy and says, oh, that guy's not all here. That's correct. We're not. Newbie souls that just started incarnating, the energy is small enough, where they may be able to put their soul into a single body. But if you're coming to Earth, you've gotten big in your energy. And if you tried to put all of you that is in heaven into a human body, it would burn it up, it'd fry to a crisp. And so what we do is the same thing God does with us. So a little piece separates, we separate a little piece of ourselves, and that energy goes into the body. And so most of us are still on the other side of the veil. Would it bother you to know that some of your guides are you? It's you, your higher self talking to you. And now we have terminology for that. My higher self. I think we didn't have that 50 years ago. And so near-death experiencers have been confused to arrive in heaven and see relatives or friends that are still alive on Earth. It's like, you're not dead. What are you doing here in heaven? It's like, well,
I've heard that many times where people are like, oh, I had an experience, and, they went into this mode of disbelief because one or two people that were in that experience were still alive, so they sort of just.
And so, yeah, you can meet people that are still alive in heaven. These teenagers get together and they play these interactive online video games, sometimes from all over the world. And they choose an avatar and what the avatar looks like, and they choose this character, and they can change the eye color and the hair and the outfit and all that. And they play many different characters with their friends, and they may never have met each other. Well, if they all get together and meet in person someday, are they somehow different people? No, it's the group, and we all played these different characters, and that's the way it is. These soul groups. Oh yeah, you and me were husband and wife, and then we were enemies in another life, and then we were brother and sister, and then we were best friends, and then we were boss and employee, and you play all sorts of different roles. And kids do that here. Well, let's play cops and robbers. This time you be the robber, I'll be the cop, and then they switch next time. So
right, no, I get that.
That's sure. Yeah, and well, they tend to appear in heaven. So in the natural form, you're this sphere of energy and consciousness. You don't have a body, but you can take on a light body, and so what most souls will do is they'll take on the appearance of the way you remember them, but they'll generally take on sort of the best looking version of themselves. Like one woman got to heaven, she met her grandmother, and she said, well, I mean, you recognize people in heaven. She says, well, I knew it was my grandmother, but it didn't look like her. I said, what do you mean? I said, my grandmother had gray hair, no teeth, wrinkled skin. She was hunched over. She looked like a very elderly woman, and here in heaven, she was a beautiful young woman, long black hair, around 30 years old, smiled and had a full set of teeth. So, you tend to pick the best version of yourself. Now, sometimes they'll appear the way they did on Earth just so you could see them. So like one guy met the hot-headed apostle Peter, which is his favorite biblical character. So, favorite character. Okay, we'll have Peter meet him when he gets here. They're nice to us. They create an environment that we like. And he says, yeah, I was a bit shabby looking. Because, that's probably how he looked like as a fisherman, right? So,
can you talk about some of the dramatic ways in which near-death experiences have changed people's lives?
So, whatever they were chasing in their life before, whether it was career or a hobby or, women or men or, a group or an activity, whatever was their main thing, in life that takes a back seat to loving, meaningful relationships and making a contribution to humanity. So they come back with a strong desire to have deep, meaningful relationships, loving relationships, and to do something to help others. Some of the major changes is they become less materialistic and more altruistic. They have career changes. A billionaire gave up all his ties to the finance industry and became a counselor, marriage and family counselor. A man who was a policeman, gave that up and became a high school teacher. And of course, first one I ever heard, Howard Storm, he was a militant atheist, an art teacher, and he became a pastor in the United Church of Christ. And so they go through these career changes where there was even a mafia guy who said, all right, well, I'm going to be on the other side of that. I'm going to help kids who are getting involved in gangs and things like that. And so they give up all that stuff. Fear diminishes drastically. So they tend to take chances. They tend to just roll the dice on stuff. They tend to live in the moment. So, I have a problem with worrying about what might happen tomorrow or being upset about what happened yesterday. And they tend to not have that. And of course, a lot of them lose that ego-based desire to have an image, a reputation. They lose the desire to defend themselves against an accusation, prove that they're right, make sure I'm a good person. They don't care about that. All they care about is doing good, showing love to their fellow human beings, fulfilling their purpose of why they came down here to Earth. And of course, they lose their fear of death completely. The fear of death is gone. They're not afraid at all.
Would you say then that the majority of experiencers come back in sort of an more awakened state, different state of awareness, so that their fears, based on what they just experienced, now that they realize certain things, it gives them that strength to take more risks, more chances, because they know that inevitably they're going back home and they're not fearing any of those consequences that they used to.
Well, sure. When you are aware that you're immortal, you're going to be a lot less fearful of things. When you're aware that you're never alone down here, that you're being taken care of, that there's this divine, powerful being that is the source of everything in existence that adores you, and you're like his favorite child, and he's protecting you, well, of course, you're going to have a sense of, I can do anything down here. And of course, another thing that they come back with is a realization of their power. So, one of the things I heard early on in my research that confused me at first is people would come back and say, well, I had no idea how powerful my thoughts and words are. I would have chosen them more carefully. And people realize that they create their own problems and they create their own successes. And really, it's an attitude. For instance, pain. I suffered chronic pain for many, many years, 20 years, worsening chronic pain. I spent 3 years in a mobility scooter, and it went away completely for about 2 years. And it's come back a little bit. My right foot, I'm having problems walking again. Didn't happen like the first time. Sure, I've got the pain just like before. Not quite as severe, but when I was in less pain than this, I was really depressed before and not now. Why? Because I learned, little hint, what near-death experiencers really learn, which is there's going to be pain down here. We don't come down here to suffer. It's part of the process. Just like when you run a triathlon, you don't do it to suffer, but it's part of the process. And there's always going to be pain in life, but we are the ones who choose our level of suffering. And so this time around, I didn't focus on the pain. I just said, well, I'm going to treat that like a nuisance, and I'm going to go out. Okay, so I can't walk anymore very far. Well, I'm going to ride my bike. I can still do that. I'll get my exercise, and I'm not going to let it ruin my day. And so that's how heaven wants us to take on suffering and pain. They want us to go through it with joy, if possible, to have joy in the middle of it and laugh about it, and to have like this humble dignity. And I wasn't very good at that. Still not great at it, but I'm doing better than before. Yeah.
I'm glad to hear that.
Say the things I'm grateful for in prayers. And gratitude's a very powerful energy, because what you
Mm,
are grateful for, you get more of. And so I say, well, I'm grateful that this is going to heal again, and I'm going to be walking again. And I know I will.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Also, souls are born or created, or we just always were.
Well, we always were. We've always existed because we're part of the divine creator who's immortal outside the dimension of time. I got no other ways to say that.
That's a
But what
perfect way of saying it.
happens is, just like the higher self separates a little piece and becomes human, and that human kind of develops on its own. And so that piece of the soul has its own little personality and develops, just like a tree, right? It starts out as the trunk, and then it branches out, and then you have all these, it keeps splitting out, and it becomes this very complex thing. But that tree, assuming the tree's immortal, when it was just a trunk, it was, just a little shoot, it was still the same. So yeah, we always been part of that eternity. We've always existed. We always will. We are as eternal as God because we're part of God.
And in your studies, like, over the years, have you ever used you yourself listening to someone? Has anyone ever put you in the mode of, oh man, I'm doubting this? Like maybe this is just not real, the stuff that I've been studying all these years?
I had a few moments like that, and it was more early on stuff. So like, I, the first NDE, the guy saw angels, and they were luminous beings of light. And another lady, she saw them, and they were angels like the traditional angels you'd see in a church with wings and feathers and all that. I'm like, okay, so this is inconsistent. Maybe this is all. And of course, later I found out that they will appear, if you're Catholic and this is your vision of an angel, they'll appear like that. So you feel comfortable and you recognize that this is an angel. So they kind of tailor experiences to us. I think I've heard maybe two in all that time where I said this person did not have an NDE,
So it's
or
those particular
none of them.
people, but it wasn't the concept or the reality itself that you were questioning. It was
No,
just the people.
I had a few doubts, but they weren't very strong doubts, because, I mean, you can tune into a podcast like this and listen all about near death experiences, but it's different when you're sitting in front of somebody personally. Like my own aunt had an NDE that she'd never talked about. And then when I told her about, I'm writing this book about it, she told me all about it. When you're sitting in front of somebody really well, and they start talking and you can tell they're being genuine, that's hard to deny. And of course, there's a whole range of people who don't want to talk about it. Well, why would you make up a lie you don't want to talk about? A lie has a purpose. I'm trying to avoid blame. I'm trying to lie to manipulate somebody and get money out of them or get something I want. Well, you don't make up a lie that you keep to yourself. That doesn't make any sense. And one of the guys that told me his near-death experience, I'd been looking for a car years back, and I was at a used car lot, and the guy was missing an arm. I didn't ask him what happened. He told me, we were talking, and he says, "Oh yeah, I lost this in a boating accident. I was water skiing, and I fell, and the boat behind ran over me, severed my arm." And he says to me, "I arrived dead at the hospital. They had to revive me." And I was just doing the research for my book at that point. And I says, "Well, did you come out of your body? You see it from above? Did you hear the thoughts and feel the feelings of the doctors and nurses? You go through a tunnel, you see the light." And he, "And to you too?" He had never told anybody. We stopped the sale, and he told me his whole experience. And he says, "I was just afraid to tell anybody." Because, 100 years ago, if you talked about your NDE, they'd put you in a psych ward. They'd put you in a mental institution.
So your book is called God Took My Clothes.
Yes, it's on Amazon and Barnes and Noble, both in paperback and ebook.
Wonderful. We'll
And
put the links up.
then if you go to godtookmyclothes.com, you can download the first couple of chapters for free, and make sure you like the book before you pop $12 for it. And of course, if you speak Spanish, it's not considered the same book. And so, a publisher owns the rights. I can't give it away, but I can give away the Spanish version. So the entire Spanish version is there to download. And there's also a link on godtookmyclothes.com to my spiritual counseling services. And I have a program for people in financial hardships and things like that.
So before I let you go, David, the last question would be, in the last 300 or so since we spoke last, anything new, any new developments, new things that you learned in any of those interviews that you would like to share?
Yes. And I guess it's a little disturbing, but I had heard quite a few near-death experience testimonies where they were shown the future. Very few. I mean, less than 10%. Well, I'm going to say less than 5% were shown future events. One guy, for instance, saw San Francisco, huge earthquake. And I said, well, when's this going to happen? He said, well, I don't know, but there were no side view mirrors on the cars, on any of the cars. And no side view. And this was years ago. Well, now I've heard for the first time they're coming out with some of these electric vehicles that have little cameras instead of side view mirrors. And I'm thinking, okay, San Francisco's good for now, but when they're all like that, I'd be careful if you're in San Francisco. So one of the things I heard maybe 5 or 6 times that people saw in the future was China invading the United States. Now, I first heard this, it was like 10 years ago or something. Like, China? I mean, they don't have a military. The military was a joke. Well, now I think it's like a third of the size of the U.S. and they're coming up quick and they're kind of hell bent on world domination. Well, one lady who was shown future events, she mentioned China invading and gave dates. And this testimony was an older test. She had her near-death experience in 2013 when cryptocurrency was fairly new and kind of, not really well accepted like it is today. And she said, well, I was told, now, whenever you talk about future events, it can change. Before 1989, before the Cuban Missile Crisis, the potential was Earth was going to destroy itself. Nostradamus, Mothership, then Revelation, that was all going to happen. So this isn't set in stone. Human beings have free will and we could change. But the way it looks like it's going now, these things could happen. So she said by the beginning of 2024, with the world banking system on the verge of collapse, they were going to issue a World Bank digital currency and eliminate cash, sort of as a way to control and track how people spend money. And if they don't like you, they can shut your money off and things like it gives government a lot more control. I didn't think anything of it back then, but now it's like, wow, there's bank failures and the World Bank just came up with a digital currency and it's getting kind of scary. She said that by 2028, a new president would be elected, would bring back cash, reform the world's banking system that serves the people better. And that from 2028 to 2061, we were going to have a period of relative stability and calm. There'll still be there small wars and economic things and like that, but relative period of calm. So we might have 4 years of some difficult times here in the U.S. or the world, and then things will be better. And then in 2061, she said the United States would split. Now, back in 2013, the United States split. Why would they do that? Well, now you can see it. There's a big division in the United States. And apparently that's going to get worse. And it's going to be a split without a civil war, but it's not going to be a peaceful split. It's going to be like a nasty divorce. There's just not going to be a fist fight. And then in 2063, 2 years later, she said China would see that as their opportunity to take down the big boy on the block. With 40 years of United States weakening, 40 years of China strengthening, they might be able to do it. And then in the 7-year war, where U.S., Canada, and Mexico bands together against China, they'd be defeated. And 2070, so we're talking less than 5 decades, would be the beginning of world peace. The world would say, with the 2 major superpowers fighting, and I imagine it's going to cause a lot of economic and social chaos. They're going to say that's enough. And so it looks like we're only about 50 years away from world peace, which will just be the first step. Once we stop fighting each other and start cooperating, then things are going to really get going. And a new world of love is coming. It's about 150 years away, but it's coming.
I just wanted to thank you so much for being on the show. It's been wonderful as usual. I hope you come on again one day, and I wish you the best of luck continuing with your studies on near-death experiences. Thank you so very much.
Thank you, John. I appreciate being back on the show, and keep spreading your light and love. And thank you for doing your beautiful work.
Appreciate that. Thank you.